So I'm just going to quickly walk through some of the things I look for, some of the things I found on the main movers this morning. I'm not going to go deep diving into filings. I'm just going to show some surface level stuff that I like to know. And then I also want to talk about the reason why I like to know this stuff for me personally and the way I trade. Um, so obviously dilution here is a popular concept, particularly among short sellers, because well, at the end of the day, what causes stocks to move up and down is supply and demand, and dilution is part of that equation with the supply. Um, I like to know some of this other information because of the demand side. I like to use it to gauge whether or not I think there's going to be any kind of real sustained demand for a stock. By looking at the news, by seeing if there's any catalyst, positive or negative. As I'll walk through in this first example, XCUR. I'll just jump into the news real quick. And obviously, I mean, everybody knows this was kind of a BS reason for it to be up, that they received an extension from NASDAQ for their compliance with some of these listing rules. One of them was them not not meeting the stockholders' equity requirement of 2.5 million. So that's basically just their assets minus their liabilities has to be over 2.5 million. I can see I actually just asked, like, what's their stockholders' equity is 1.6 million. They also did just convert debt, $1 million in debt to equity. So that would put them a little over it. However, this was back on June 30th, and we can see that they burn around $1 million a quarter. So they're back under that. So they're still struggling to meet that. In our insights here, we can take a quick, this highlights is basically just highlights from their 8Ks, and then financials highlights from the financial report. We can see that they're, if they're unable to raise, they might seek bankruptcy protection. You can see over here that they basically reduced their R&D expenses to zero, and they've suspended all related activities. So you basically see that they're not actually almost not even really an operating business anymore. They have no revenues. Don't really have any expenses or operations. So they're kind of seems like they're going to be winding down, and probably a good chance they will ultimately delist because it costs a lot of money to stay listed on the stock exchange. And also, we just had a couple stocks that just kind of, I would say, at least for me, it was kind of surprised. Like SMFL just got delisted to the pink sheets, sort of out of nowhere. I'd been following them. They had some issues, but it did come a little bit of a surprise that they delisted. But when there's that risk, so this is going back to my original point about gauging supply and demand. So with these stocks, I mean, obviously the stocks we're trading, we're day trading these small cap stocks, and they have momentum and they squeeze and they go far. But the thing is that in and of itself is a reason for people to long it, but that's it. Once the volume and the momentum is gone, nobody wants to be holding this, especially something like this, where an 8K could come out at any time, basically saying they're delisting or they're doing a dilutive offering or a dilutive debt to equity conversion. There's just a lot of negative headline risk that keeps people from wanting to buy and hold these things, which is one of the things that can keep stocks elevated. That's one of the reasons why, like, cult stocks are always a pain, because there is, like, actually a real, legitimate or not, there's a bull thesis going around that gets people to buy and hold those stocks. But I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. But I had mentioned this is, I was mentioning this about XCUR, that I like these types because while degenerate day traders might long the momentum, once that's gone, no one wants to be holding these. Which is kind of similar, the same thing with TBIO. Now TBIO, I ultimately actually didn't trade it because I don't know, I was a little scared of it, just because it was a situation where everybody knew about this delisting, kind of like with I guess EGIO, where even when the delisting notice came out, it kind of like even started spiking on that. Because the thing is, once this comes out, actually, there's actually no more negative headline news. You have until September 30th to keep on day trading this if you want to. That said, they did have this Form 25 filing, which, it just confirms it, but it's still kind of like a headline negative potential catalyst that's still coming out, basically saying, okay, it's for sure, we're getting delisted. So I had mentioned that, I thought that combined with the fact that I mean, shorts had already gotten beat up by low floats 2 days in a row, so a third would be a little far fetched. Anyways, that basically going back to the whole supply and demand equation. This type of thing is once the momentum's gone, then nobody wants to be holding the bag on these things. We'll go over to another example, SGN. So SGN, oops. Let's go over the news here. So they're acquired a majority stake in this company. It's like casino gaming company. Now, one thing, this is just the summary here, was that they're assuming an equity value of 14 million for SGN. Now, I looked into it. I mean, we see this a lot with like MGOL. I think AGBA was one. I think APM was one, where they kind of assign these valuations that, it's really just, it's pretty arbitrary. It's just some third party basically giving them evaluations that has really no fundamental basis. But the thing is this does give a bull thesis, because a $14 million valuation, that's basically 80 cents a share, which unsurprisingly, that's kind of where it sort of started topping out at, because it's like, well, even this BS valuation, how much, there's not really any more upside from that. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this does give kind of like a bull thesis, especially when you have like all these Discord and Twitter rooms. They have something to pump it, whereas like the other ones, they kind of don't. Like, what can you really say about a stock that's going to be delisted in a few days, or a stock that's like on the verge of bankruptcy or whatnot? So that was kind of what I went through on that one. There was the dilution, but it wasn't really anything really significant. At least relative to the volume. I always see if the volume was lower, then this would matter a bit more, especially because this one, I mean, these shares are basically free to this council because they owed them money, and they basically said, hey, you can pay us back later. We'll just give you 2.5 million warrants for nothing. So there was that. So that not necessarily enough to support like I guess you could say a bear thesis. They did also have this old 1A offering that they're trying to do, which is, it's kind of like an S1/S3. There's some similarities to both of them. This also needs to get an effect. In this case, it's called a qualification. The thing about this is because it was back in April and they hadn't done anything since then, no amendments or anything, and they've had all these developments happen with the company, they're going to need, likely going to need to file an amendment before they can do anything with that. So there wasn't really like, I guess, an offering risk for this one. They had been doing, I guess, some private placements recently, some small raises here and there. But yeah, there's just some of the things I'm thinking about. So, when I'm thinking about like XCUR and TBIO, I'm just thinking, okay, these are the types of stocks where once they fail, once they're below VWAP, they should stay there and fade. Obviously, I say that in hindsight after the fact, because I mean, it does happen where stocks with terrible fundamentals, they come back, they trap. But it's rarer than you think. You remember them because when it happens to you, obviously it sticks in your head more than the ones that just never come back. But anyways, there's kind of like what I was thinking about in terms of my stock selection. I will by no means was I ever like bullish on this, but it was just something I was considering when thinking about like the easiness that it would fade off. One that was kind of like a I guess it wasn't like a clear like, oh, this has negative catalyst coming or this is positive catalyst coming. It was just more like it's just a technical setup for me. I mean, there's a few things that stood out to me. I guess one was a 51 decrease in revenue is pretty horrible. So that stuck out to me. The other thing was that well, it's a SPAC and they completed the business combination around 6 months ago, and that's usually when lockup ends. I mean, I asked to confirm when does lockup expire, which was last week, and from the downtrend pre-market. So basically, I just put all that stuff together, thinking that okay, there's the lockup, there's some selling pre-market. I thought that would be a good short, but nothing really like there's something super, this is like it wasn't a TBIO or an XCUR. I'll put it that way. It was just a technical setup. There's nothing really fundamental. I mean, the lockup, you can't really put a lot of emphasis on that, just because, I mean, you don't, unless you do some deeper digging into the company and who the holders are and what they do, you don't know if they're actually going to sell, or if they believe in the company and then they're not going to sell. So can't really use that to support like a really solid thesis. I did no, that was TBIO. So yeah, I'll show my crappy chart first. But as you can see, it was selling off. I mean, it looked like people were unloading into it, and maybe that's what was happening, but or maybe not. But I figured after this pop, it would just die off, and it didn't. And so I just decided to ignore it because the volume was pretty strong. And then TBIO, unfortunately, I missed this one because, I mean, it popped, and I was. It's easy to say in hindsight that, obviously 2 days in a row of shorts getting steamrolled by these low floats, is it really going to be able to happen again? And I think because a lot of people did what I did and they kind of just avoided it, that's why it did this. I was looking for one little like push and fail, and it just didn't, so I didn't get in that one. And then Xcur was a good one. Hopefully it doesn't come back and squeeze me out. Here I am saying like, oh, these once they die, they're done, and I'm gonna wake up tomorrow. This is gonna be gapping up. But anyways, that's pretty much it. Just wanted to kind of go through some of the things I look for, why I like knowing this information, because it really, at the end of the day, comes down to just kind of having a pulse on the supply and demand. Not that it's something that's like measurable. It's just, for me personally, that gives me confidence and conviction in a trade. Everybody's different, but that's just that's how I trade. And that's it.